Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. During what was an otherwise quiet week, there were two developments with possible huge economic implications. One was the City Council's delay of a biodistrict initiative, and the other was an announced relaunch of the former Avondale shipyard site. We'll be looking at those stories as well as answering what is the Wisner Fund and why has it been in the news lately? Plus, what can we expect from the fall elections and how important will Louisiana be in shaping the national political map? All of this, plus a look at Popeyes on its 50th anniversary and how the founder's dream redefined the state's cuisine. At our table are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Tony McCauley, staff writer for the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, David Hammer, investigative reporter, WWL-TV Channel 4, and Tyler Bridges, staff writer, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. We're all seated around the table again, which we have not been, 2.5 years, right, E?
And the reason for a little bit of the confusion, hey, this is TV.
Yes.
Well, for most of the lifetime of the show, we've always been sitting around a table, sometimes with maybe like a half circle or a circle, or in this case, it's an oval. When COVID came, there was a lot of discussion about it from the management, and they wanted everyone separated. And so for the last couple of years, we've been doing it each from our own stall on the section, okay? Which has some advantages and some disadvantages. But tonight, we're back at the table. It's a really beautiful oval table, so we can all see each other and grin at each other and signal at each other when we have something
interrupt each other?
Interrupt each other and all that. But it's,
Right.
Do the old Larry Lorenz wrapping up.
Right. Yeah, it's just great to have everybody around the table again, and so wonderful interaction we expect, absolutely. So, okay, now let's get down to the real discussion. That's with Tony starting off first. Bio-Innovation District, exactly what is it, and are we going to get one?
I think we are, but it's been so delayed that that's really the big question right now. And the news this week is that the council, which was expected to just vote it through, has postponed it yet again. They want to get more detail. And the question that I got from one of the people that want to see it happen was, this should have been so much easier, and it's just dragged on for so long now. The reason is just really politics, getting some money behind this thing and getting a clear vision for what it should be. Innovation districts they've been around forever, for decades. They're all over the world. And basically what they are cities are trying to revitalize typically some downtrodden part of the city and find something economic around which to build something. So in this case, we have universities. We have a huge growing footprint for Tulane University in the downtown area. Mm-hmm. And the Bio-Innovation NOBIC, the New Orleans Bio-Innovation Hub over on Canal Street, which almost died and was revitalized recently. What it's meant to be is you want to build a whole community, and that includes people living in the area, all kinds of restaurants, a whole sort of environment to create something like Cambridge, Massachusetts, or Silicon Valley, a mini version thereof. So that's what they want to do with this thing, but it just hasn't really taken shape because nobody's really, I think what the conclusion is that nobody's really kind of figured out how much money you need for it and exactly what it should do.
But other communities, other cities have done this, and we've looked to these other cities, but they've done it in sort of a different way.
Yeah, I mean, there are many, many examples, and many have failed, and some have worked. Some have worked very well. The one that they like to point to for as an example for ours is the Cortex area in St. Louis. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing about that, when they've done studies on it as to why it was successful, it wasn't successful terribly successful for the first 10 years because it didn't have a clear vision, which is one of the criticisms about what our bio district is right now. When it did take off, they basically hired a guy to be, the chief cheerleader for it, paid him a good chunk of money, and he went out and just kind of made it happen. The main distinction between what they did in St. Louis and ours, and where a lot of the critics here that have been in the council criticizing this one here, is that this one here is being proposed to be funded by a share of the general tax take. The incremental, the growth in tax, they want to take 2% of the sales tax to fund this thing, whereas in St. Louis and a lot of these other places, they tie it directly to specific projects, the incremental taxes they're going to get from new projects that come into the area. So it's directly linked to the success of the thing. So that's,
Tony, if someone's trying to visualize where this might be, would the area around the old Charity Hospital be a good example if you're trying to think what the area is?
Yeah, I mean, we visualized it on a map when they first proposed it a year ago. It's now shrunk to half that size because all of the residential neighborhoods said, we don't want you to define us in this district because of the past history when they expropriated some properties in that area when they built the VA hospital and all that. And so they've shrunk that district down to exactly what you say, that area right around that Charity Hospital, which is, we know that's going to be developed already because Tulane is the anchor tenant, taking 350,000 square feet there. So in the next few years, that's going to be developed anyway. So there's a lot of organic stuff that's happening down there that's going to create this. Some people argue that that's how you should go, that these should be organically created and privately funded. That's part of the argument against the biodistrict. But there is a strong case that you need some unifying force to force through public works type stuff. I mean, they want to put in new lighting. They want to prettify Duncan Plaza.
So to give it a definite look, and would these be mostly health-related type of businesses?
Well, what other cases have shown is you can't really define it. You have to create the conditions, and then you hope that businesses come and are spun off from university research and all that kind of stuff.
There was a lot of property speculation surrounding the larger footprint initially that goes back to the years right after Katrina, right? I mean, people buying up properties near where the new LSU hospital is and all of that further up Canal Street, right?
Yeah, and where, the case studies where people have determined that these innovation districts have failed is when they just become real estate driven. That it doesn't benefit the broader community. It just becomes a gentrification to, I don't like that word, but, one of these projects which just ends up benefiting real estate developers and the already well-off,
So council delayed, when will we see council action on this, one way or the other?
The council folk are vague on it. They want to see a number of things, like about DBE, for example, that minority businesses are going to get a piece of this, and a bunch of other things, so who knows?
All right, Tony, thanks a lot. Let's see now. We're going over to David. And Wisner Foundation, we've been hearing a lot about it. It's something that's been around for 100+ years. What is it and what's going on with it right now?
Well, forgive me because I do have to do a little bit of a history lesson here because the Wisner Trust was created in 1914. Edward Wisner donated huge tracts of land, mostly in southern Lafourche Parish, to the city of New Orleans. And he died in 1915, and it was supposed to extend for 100 years as a trust, and then it was going to be turned over to the city. Now, along the way, 1928, the heirs of Wisner, which were then known as the Wisner ladies, sued to basically say, we should get a piece of this too. So the heirs then started to get a piece because there was an agreement with the city that was approved by the mayor and the city council at the time that they would share some of these revenues because the land creates revenue, and over time it got extremely beneficial, lucrative, because Port Fourchon is in the center of one of the biggest pieces of land.
So millions generated.
Millions
and where
generated.
have the money's gone over the years?
Well, over the years they've been doled out by the city of New Orleans and went to the heirs. So like 40% of it went to the heirs, another 35% or so went to the city, and then Tulane LSU, which was then Charity Hospital, got a piece. So fast forward, and 2014 it's supposed to end and be turned over to the city. That doesn't happen. It was not actually physically moved over the trust. So it was continued.
That was under Mitch Landrieu.
Right, Mitch Landrieu didn't take the kind of proactive action needed to consolidated under city control. So it just kind of got extended by both him and Cantrell. The big difference was that 2 years into Cantrell's term in 2020, she actually took action to create some kind of a side agreement with the heirs where they took the position that everybody gets to share in this now as a private entity going on ad infinitum. And so previously, when the city would get its share, it would dole it out through a process that was public, and we would see where all this money went. And starting in 2020, we lost that. We don't know where the money went. And we found out, for instance, that some of the money, about $850,000 in 2022, this year, went to a nonprofit that was created by LaToya Cantrell called Forward Together New Orleans to run some of her pet projects and other city affiliated projects. And so I actually did some stories raising questions about what happened with that money and how is Forward Together New Orleans run. But the concern from the city council is this money has been, the public view on this money has been lost. And we need to have a view of it now. And Judge Kern Reese in Orleans Parish Civil District Court agreed and said, this is public money. I'm giving a preliminary injunction against spending any more of that money, basically saying put a freeze on spending any more of the money.
Even to the heirs?
Or even to the heirs. And then let's get a public accounting to the city council and to the public of where all of this money is gone.
And meanwhile, the mayor has been critical of that, saying, well, some of these nonprofits now are not going to get their money.
Right, and she's couching it that way, but before 2020, let's keep in mind, these nonprofits got to share in the city's take on this money. The city's share of this money was doled out to nonprofits, but it was done in a public manner where we got to see where all that money went.
Okay, so now with the judge's ruling, funds are frozen, nobody's getting any money. How long will that be in effect? And then will we start learning where these monies are going?
Well, that's part of the process now going forward in the court process, that there has to be an accounting to the city council and to the public of exactly where the monies have gone. We're talking about, if the city gets the whole benefit of the leases from the properties, like particularly Port Fourchon, we could be talking about $10 million or more a year that the city would get instead of just their $33.5 million share of it. And then the money would go into the general fund, which has oversight by the city council rather than the mayor doling it out in secret to various private nonprofits.
And isn't it that the case where she went to court on behalf of that kid, was that part of the
So that's Forward Together New Orleans that
Right.
was involved in funding some of these programs, and one of those programs was one where she went and supported a kid who was part of a nonviolence or gun violence prevention program, and she went to support this kid who had been charged with, carjackings, and the victims of the carjackings were upset at her for sitting with the defendant.
So we'll see what happens with the monies down the line. We'll get a chance to see trust dissolved. Is that basically a bottom line?
No. So that's not been finalized.
Okay.
The dissolution of the trust has not been dissolved, but that is certainly indicated by Judge Reese that that's where he's headed.
All right, we will see. Thanks a lot, David. Tyler, now over to you. In November, we go to the polls, some races that you wanted to talk about. Which one first? Steve Scalise race?
Sure, yeah, November 8th is the day of the election. Hope everyone's registered to vote and everybody will vote, especially you guys here.
Of course.
I better not be.
Okay, not you, Tony. Steve Scalise has been in Congress since 2008. He's the second-ranking Republican in the House. He's in a seat that he is supposed to win and almost certainly will win, but a woman, a Democrat up in St. Tammany Parish who's running against him came out with a very interesting ad saying, hey, I'm pro-choice. That part wasn't a surprise, but she actually had video footage of her giving birth to her son in September. Mm-hmm. And so that ad then went viral.
And that would get you attention.
Yeah. I hadn't seen an ad like that before. And so that's in Scalise district, which is the white areas of suburban New Orleans. Mm-hmm. Then another race keeping an eye on is John Kennedy running for re-election. He is also heavily favored. He came out with an ad a week ago where he said, hey, if you don't like cops and you're in trouble, call a crackhead. And
Which has really gotten a lot of criticism.
right, it has gotten a lot of criticism. I wrote a story where Gary Chambers, who's one of his challengers, said it was racist and reminiscent of the 1988 Willie Horton ad by then Vice President Bush. I spoke to a political consultant and said, you know what, Kennedy actually wants a reaction from the left because that will fire up his base.
Yeah.
And he can then raise money off of it and look at how these people on the left are attacking me. So that's another race that's gotten some attention of late. And then the third one I would point to, Marcia, is a state Senate race in New Orleans, particularly uptown, would also include the Warehouse District, the Central Business District, Garden District. And there you have two state representatives. One is Mandy Landry, the other is Royce Duplessis. Their voting records are almost identical. They're both liberal Democrats, and they're running in the most liberal state Senate district in the state. And this is to replace Karen Carter Peterson, who you'll remember resigned from her seat because of corruption. So that also is on the ballot November 8th. And both Duplessis and Landry are very strong pro-choice candidates. In fact, Landry, that's her signature issue. She's actually been an attorney for an abortion clinic up in Shreveport. But Representative Duplessis this past week said, hey, I'm not going to cede this issue to her. And he came out with an interesting ad where his mother appeared talking straight into camera and told about her grandmother who had used a coat hanger 125 years ago to self-induce or to self-abort. And then from the shame, depression, and guilt over that, died a few years after that. So that race is turned interesting. And again, there's really not much difference between the two of them on the issues. So it's really kind of coming down to differences in personalities and style.
Right.
I had a question about the Kennedy race. Do you think there's going to be any issue made of his votes on certifying the election or his vote in one of the state certifications?
You're talking about the January
Arizona?
6th. Yeah, that's a great question, David, and something I want to write about. But we've seen nationally that has not hurt Republicans who voted not to certify President Biden's election on January 6th. And in fact, we have a lot of Republicans across the country who are expressing the falsehood that actually President Trump was reelected.
There's
Right.
one thing that Kennedy gets that hardly anybody gets, and it's new politics, in that he's on a lot of YouTube videos that come out all day. And what it is with YouTube people, like they got cameras, and especially interrogations, like when someone new is being nominated for a committee, he is so much fun to watch, okay? I mean, with that drawl, and he can be sarcastic and just tearing people apart, that he's chosen a lot. And for people around the country, and of course in the state, are seeing him throughout the year on his interviews. Nobody else gets that kind of coverage.
Right, and he's become a favorite on Fox News. He's very clever in coming up with one-liners, and he's raised a ton of money in this race where his challengers, Gary Chambers Jr., Luke Mixon, and Sarita Steve really haven't raised very much money at all. So he's a heavy favorite in that election.
So as a rule, if you want to succeed, be quotable.
Yeah, and Errol, you wanted to touch on Louisiana's place nationally. We don't
Well,
have
there's
much
a lot
time
of talk
for it.
with this election about the election years have impact on the national politics. The latest I saw on Congress is it's almost a toss-up, but leaning towards the Republicans getting control of the House of Representatives, and the Senate's just like even right now. And there's about 2 or 3 elections, Senate races, like the one in Pennsylvania and I think Kentucky or somewhere else.
Georgia.
Georgia,
Herschel
Georgia.
Walker.
And they both have high-profile people, with Herschel Walker in one and Dr. Oz in the other one. Louisiana is not in any of those, okay? Louisiana is not going to have an impact because, the Senate seats, I think, is going to remain Republican. The way the congressional districts are drawn, of the 6 congressional districts, 5 are solid Republican and 1 is solid Democrat. Now, it could happen that during the process that who the Republican is and who the Democrat is will change, but it seems like if you get to this point, the incumbents are all okay. But nothing happened during redistricting in terms when there was this effort to create a second black congressional district, and ultimately the courts delayed it until November. But 10 years from now, maybe if that second congressional district, which is still solidly black, if it was divided a little bit, still a majority, but still a little bit more in the other district. Maybe the other district might have a chance also. But
actually, we're waiting on the Supreme Court in an Alabama case, which is similar to Louisiana, with the folks in Alabama saying, "Hey, you should have created a second black seat in Alabama." So it's possible that the Supreme Court in the Alabama case could rule in such a way that could even create a second black district in Louisiana, which would take away what appears to be a white seat.
And we will. That remains to be seen.
But
We
not
will see.
entirely?
We need to move to the next
Okay,
segment, right? Because we're running out of time. Tony, you were going to talk about what's happening over at what used to be Avondale Shipyards.
Yeah, that was today. The current governor, John Bell Edwards, was amongst 36 politicians who turned up for this. Renaming of what was the old Avondale Shipyard, and is now something called the Avondale Global Gateway. And this is something that, as he reminded the audience, he was there 4 years ago to talk about the high hopes for this to be a revitalization of the West Bank of the Mississippi over there in Bridge City area and so on. In the past 4 years, we've had all the things that we know about. The record high waters was the first thing they had to deal with, and they couldn't get work done, and then COVID-19, and then the hurricanes,
Right.
so on and so forth. So now what what he was saying today was, what the governor was saying was, let's not have a bunch of nostalgia about this, how this used to be the state's biggest employer. We're never going to build any more ships here, but what they see over there is this is a 275-acre site now. These guys have plunged a lot of money into this, private money. T. Parker Host is the name of the company, and the guy, which was a Virginia-based company, has moved his whole family down here, put his own money into it, a guy called Adam Anderson. And what they need to do there, they've got some of that business going in the last couple of years, but what they need is big manufacturers to come down there and be the anchor tenants, and then they're hoping to get a bunch of businesses building around that.
And what kind of businesses? What do they envision? How will this property be used now?
The one that they're close to signing is a U.S. U.S. subsidiary of a Colombian consortium of palm oil. They're one of the biggest palm oil guys in the world, and Fuji is already near their 70 million palm oil. So what they want to do is build a bunch of food-related processing companies down there. The other big one they're targeting is wind. And they had in the audience today some of the world's biggest wind guys, GE
Turbines,
Wind.
right?
Turbines and all the other
Wind
stuff that goes
yeah.
into building those big, particularly offshore. That's the big push for that Governor Edwards is going for, the state's going for. Licenses are coming up for the first offshore wind farms in Louisiana. Should see them next year. So what they're envisaging is that some of these big companies will go down there and have their companies at Avondale, carting those things
and
out
taking advantage of the wonderful
waters.
transportation corridor that is there. I mean, there's rail, there's water, so that's a real big benefit that they see to make use of this property.
Yep.
Okay,
Exactly.
Tony. Thanks.
And by the way, there's 3,000 acres downriver from there, which they hope will be a bunch of other manufacturers,
While your phone is serenading us,
Thank
right?
you. Yes, that's my.
Why don't you answer that right now? We're going to go over to Errol. Thanks, Tony. Popeyes chicken, 50 years. Hard to believe.
The 50th anniversary. That was the first time most New Orleanians saw lava rocks, because remember the early Popeyes had lava rocks in New Orleans, the thing. Anyway, we have a couple of images that we want to show you.
Yeah,
This was the predecessor to the first Popeyes on Judge Perez Drive. It was the original was called Chicken on the Run, and Al Copeland opened that.
Well, look at those prices, huh?
Prices, I think you could buy a bucket like for $2 or something like that. And it wasn't very successful, and Copeland realized his chicken wasn't anything special. And so he closed it down, and then came back and says, maybe I gotta do something about this chicken. So he started experimenting, especially with spiciness. He had taste tests with family people, making spicy. People said, well, it's good, but it's too hot for the kids. He said, the kids will learn to get used to it. Anyway, he started it, he reopened it, he called it Popeyes, not after the Sailor Man, but after the character in the movie French Connection. If you remember the Gene Hackman character, it's called Popeye Doyle, and he liked that name, and whenever he would burst into a room, he'd say, Popeyes here. And so he called it that, but he said the real reason is that people are going to like this chicken, it's going to be so hot, their eyes are going to pop. And so that's where he got that from. And this is Al Copeland, this is Al Jr., who pretty much runs the business now. Now, all the little outlets, or at least most of them, are run by a Florida company. but they call it Popeyes Louisiana chicken. But they still run the Copelands. They still run the spice manufacturing and distribution. So they've still got a big hold on it. There's a book this year that Al Copeland Jr. did. And you know, sometimes you hear about this alienated father and son relationship. Al Copeland Jr. has the highest admiration for his father and has great stories to tell about him.
And we certainly have great memories too of having Popeyes for 50 years now. I mean, it started out, wasn't he selling donuts at first with sort of chicken on the side, and then it grew into this major.
I think it was a relative who was doing donuts, and discovered that in the donut business, you work longer hours and you make less money. So he said, there's got to be a better way to do this. And he kind of looked at the figures, and he said, chicken's a better business to be in.
And he was right.
And so he was influenced, by that.
Worldwide. Okay. All righty, guys. Thank you for Popeyes. Boy, we're grateful that it's here, particularly over Mardi Gras. What would Mardi Gras be without Popeyes?
Or Saints games.
Yeah, and for so many.
And it also redefined Cajun cuisine, because people think spicy chicken's a Cajun thing. It's not a Cajun thing. It's an Al Copeland thing.
That's right. Okay, other stories. E, stick with you.
Yeah. Well, also on the ballot in November will be 8 constitutional amendments. None of them are really, really controversial. But if you go to your website and look for the Public Affairs Research Council, they always do a good analysis of the constitutional amendments, and they can explain them all to you.
All right. Let's go over to Tyler.
Yes, so the election is November 8th, and the races that I was talking about earlier. But the governor's race has already started. The 2023 governor's race, we already have a declared candidate in Attorney General Jeff Landry, and if he indeed stays in the race, it'll be a brawl.
That's what we're looking forward to, aren't we? We love those brawls in Louisiana politics. David, over
As
to you.
I mentioned earlier, I did this story last week about Forward Together New Orleans, the nonprofit formed by Mayor Cantrell, and that she then sent $1 million in city money to. The Inspector General is investigating and has issued subpoenas, but when I was asking the mayor about it, she accused me and my investigation of getting between these kids and their stipends that they get through that process. So I asked her if she was accusing me of that. She said she wasn't accusing me of anything, which was an interesting exchange. So you can check that out on www.tv.com.
All right, David, thanks. Tony.
Blighted buildings, a big sort of problem for the city. There was some movement on the council. The city council took some action this week to finally try to force those things to be dealt with. There is, I can't go into the details about it now, but there is one of those notorious blighted sites that is finally going to be made into something useful for the public, and we should hear about that in the next week or so.
We'll be looking for that. All right, guys, thank you so much. Wonderful to have you all here around the table. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.